So that was one thing I was dealing with. And another thing that I'm dealing with a 7-year-old is lying to her. And where that comes in is just, those little kind of like white lies that parents tell in terms of the tooth fairy or Santa Claus or things like that. I personally have a really, really hard time lying to my kids. It doesn't feel natural to me. And I can sense that she, my 7-year-old, really challenges these notions. She has a very logical, analytical mind. So she's kind of thinking like, oh, come on, the tooth fairy? Mommy, please tell me it is you, right? So, that's a tricky one, I'm dealing with that constantly because teeth keep falling out between her and her sister. I heard this wonderful podcast. I think it was on NPR or something. It was such a great story. A few people have been talking about it. Let's see if I can remember it correctly because it ties in with the tooth fairy thing. It was this girl as an adult telling the story that when she was little, her best friend, Rachel, came to her and said, she said, I know who the tooth fairy is. And she's like, what do you mean? What happened? She's like, well, I put my tooth under my pillow and I went to sleep. But when I woke up, my dad was putting money under my pillow. And the girl's saying how she's like, so I thought about this and I was kind of blown away by that information. And later that day, I went to my mom and I said, Mommy, I know who the tooth fairy is. And my mom said, oh, really? Tell me, who's the tooth fairy? And I said, it's Rachel Horowitz's father. So the whole podcast went on where her notion of who the tooth fairy was not, she didn't apply it to it's your own individual parent. She just believed that it was her friend Rachel's dad. And she felt like she was in very special company being, a close friend of the tooth fairy's family. And she just went on and on about how she'd go to their house and she'd act all casual and just kind of be like, yeah, hi Mr. Horowitz, yeah, everything's cool. Knowing full well that he was sneaking in and putting money under her pillow every time she lost a tooth. So it was a really cute story. And the whole thing was about how kids' perceptions, we just expect them to think in a particular way that's aligned with our adult logic, and how quite often they don't. It's in a kid's world, everything has its own weight and meaning, and I don't know. I don't know how to explain that any better than that. But I think that's a perfect example. Another example was this little girl was flying in a plane for the first time, and she's in the plane. It takes off. They're flying, and she turns to her grandmother and says, "When do we get smaller?" So that's another thing, that perception of what a plane does in the sky. And anyway, better to listen to the podcast than hear me reiterate the podcast. Okay, well, so where was I? I'm truly rambling, but it's I'm kind of on a roll here. So lying to kids, yeah. So that's another thing. I would love to hear from people about how you deal with that. I do have one story of a friend who told me, she's an adult now, but she was well, obviously, but she was saying that when she was a kid, her mom had the same problem where she just found it really difficult to lie or fib to the kids on the topic of Santa Claus, tooth fairy, a bunch of different things. Well, not a bunch, but whatever those things are. And so when the kids were grown up, she confessed to them, and she said, "I'm really sorry. I didn't want to lie about that, but so she confessed, which is no big deal. I mean, obviously, everybody understands that. But then she said, but the other big lie I told you when you were growing up was that we couldn't afford to go to McDonald's." I thought that was cute too. All right, so yeah, so if you have stories and so forth, please let me know. I'm really kind of curious how other people deal with this. All right, and then speaking of other problems dealing with older kids, I read this article in the New York Times that really blew me away. It was about like a confession of a co-sleeper. Now, co-sleeping, of course, is when you sleep with your baby in the bed, but it actually doesn't have to be exclusive to a baby. People sleep in the bed with their children as they grow up, but I think that the topic comes up more frequently when a child is very small. They could be sleeping in the bed while they're still nursing, when they're like little infants, and then the habit stays, and then they're a toddler sleeping in the bed, and so on and so forth. Now, some people make an extremely conscious effort and decision to co-sleep. It's a parenting, what do I want to say? It's not a technique, it's a style. It's attachment parenting. It's a particular style of, or even if you don't adhere, you don't have to adhere to attachment parenting. It just might be in line with what feels comfortable to you. But everybody always feels, or anyone who's not doing it as a conscious decision, that other group of people tend to feel sort of guilty for doing the co-sleeping thing, or they tend to think like, well, this is a problem that needs to be resolved at some point, knowing that you personally don't want your child in your bed forever. So if you're letting your baby sleep in the bed with you, eventually, let's say they're a 2-year-old or something, and it's like time to transition them out, and how difficult that can be, and so on. So that's kind of like what people talk about. But in this article, it talked about all those parents, and I am one of them, who still have sleep problems with their kids. Not still, actually, I had no sleep problems in the beginning, but now they come into my bed every night in the middle of the night. And it used to be just one of them, and now it's 2 of them, and there's a cat, and it's crowded, and I'm cranky. So this article pointed out how common this problem is, and how reluctant parents are to actually let that be known. And I'm the same way. I never talk about it with people. I mean, very rarely. On one hand, I don't see it as such a big problem. Like, I feel like, okay, it's the middle of the night and they need their mom, and I don't know. I can't turn them away. I cannot do it. Plus, it's the middle of the night and I'm tired, and I'm not in the mood for a struggle. The way to address it sometimes is the night before. Let me just check my time. Yeah, the way to address it could be the night before by saying, okay, you're staying in your bed tonight. And I don't know, just, talking about it or giving some incentive for them to do it and that sort of thing. But you know what? That doesn't really work all the time. It doesn't work a lot of the time. I'm not sure it ever works. Once or twice. So. Yeah, so you have you can have like a 7 or 8-year-old in your bed, and so or older, I don't know, I mean, there's a particular age that kids are inclined to do this, but it is true that they will grow out of it. There will be a time when your child will have no interest in being in your bed anymore, and maybe you'll look back on these days fondly, when you had like, a foot in your face or a knee in your back, or like a little slobbering child like right on your pillow. It's actually the cat who is the most annoying, because he doesn't know the difference between the weekend and the weekday. Anyway, so if I had like my panel of example parents for in which to poll on this topic, I certainly would, but yeah, it would be good to hear back. And then, what I should do, I'm sort of planning. Sorry, my camera's telling me that I'm running out of tape, which is really bizarre.